check if the lady is streaming. I think that's the point.
Okay, no, just to know because you think I need to have it?
It's okay.
Okay, so welcome everyone to our panel on the critical role of financial institutions in driving Europe's shift towards a sustainable and resilient economy. I am Isabelle Delas, the CEO of LuxFlag. LuxFlag stands for Luxembourg Finance Labeling Agency. And we have with us representatives from the two major pillars of the Europe financial infrastructure, the European Investment Bank and the European Stability Mechanism, both of which are at the forefront of this transition. As the EU's lending arm, the EIB has committed itself to ambitious climate goals, with its climate bank roadmap and a newly defined strategic roadmap for 2024-2027. EIB is positioning itself as a global leader in climate finance, the so-called climate bank. The EIB's transformative projects include financing renewable energy and supporting innovative green technology, which actively contribute to the EU's climate objectives while promoting economic resilience and cohesion. On the other hand, the ESM plays a vital role by safeguarding the financial stability of the Eurozone and of its members. Recognizing climate change as an emerging risk to economic stability, the ESM has integrated ESG principles into its asset management and actively engaged in efforts to mitigate climate-related financial risk. Through initiatives like proposing a European reinsurance pool, the ESM is working to build resilience against climate impacts at a systemic level. Today, we will explore the contribution of these institutions to Europe's financial landscape and their strategy to support a just, inclusive transition. How are they aligning their investment practices with sustainability and resilience? And how are they ensuring that no vulnerable community is left behind as we move toward a greener economy? These are some of the critical questions we'll address with our panelists today. So please welcome Pierre Gramegna, former Minister of Finance from Luxembourg, and now Managing Director of ESM, and also Ambroise Fayolle, Vice President of EIB. So thank you so much to both of you for being with us today for our panel. Pierre and Ambroise, can you briefly explain the role your respective institutions play in Europe's financial landscape? How does that role tie in with the transition to a greener and resilient economy? Pierre, if you would like to start.
Okay, I will start and Pierre will follow. For us, we are in a big transformation of EIB to become the EU Climate Bank. So EIB is a European institution, like ESM, based in Luxembourg, like CSM. And we have been created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957. And our role is to finance projects that have a very interesting profile of investment for Europe. And we have been providing financing for climate for a long time. But actually, we are transforming the bank to become the climate bank. And with that, we have three targets that we have set. One is at least 50% of what we finance has to be in climate or environment. And we finance year after year more or less 90 billion euros of projects. Actually, last year we were at 60% already. So we have already achieved this target that was set for 2025. We also said that we would like to mobilize finance at an amount of $1 trillion for the decade 20 to 30. This is the so-called critical decade, which means 100 billion a year mobilized by our investment with where we can make investors, private or public, come to the projects that we finance we are also well ahead of schedule on that front. And the last one was we were the first multilateral development bank to finance, to say that all our projects should be Paris aligned, so contributing to the target of set in Paris at COP21. And also we have added that we should have all our counterparts should be Paris aligned, so following the same objectives of climate neutrality that has been set in Europe for 2050. So on all this, we are really making climate the key component of what we do. We do a lot of projects in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, in adaptation, in innovation related to climate. So this is really a big change in the DNA of the institution. I will end by saying something that we have been pioneer. We have issued the first ever green bond in 2007. And we have continued to issue green bonds since then. At the time, we called that climate awareness bonds because we wanted to make people aware that we needed to increase the financing for climate. Actually, last month at a big event at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, you remember that, we have announced, actually President Calvino was there, 100 billion euros of issuance listed in Luxembourg. And that's something we are very proud of, and we are very proud also of the support that Luxembourg has always provided to us in this funding in green bonds.
Thank you, Ambroise. I think it's very, very nice to hear that the EIB is really taking that leading role. I was a bit, maybe saying that he was already the climate bank, but definitely will become in the upcoming few years. So I'm sure Pierre will complement, because Pierre also, that has been former Minister of Finance, was also instrumental for the Luxembourg Sustainable Finance Roadmap, and also the good collaboration with the EIB for issuing as well the first green bond. So Pierre?
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be in the panel here with the European Investment Bank, of which I'm a big fan, as I've been also a governor of that bank for 8 years. Let me start by saying this is the first time that the European Stability Mechanism participates to a COP. So it's not my first time myself, because as a finance minister and even in other qualities, I participated to 4 COPs before, starting by Kyoto back in 1997. But this is the first one for the ESM. And so the first question you might all ask yourselves is, what can the ESM do in climate change issues? And I'm going to spend the next interventions to convince you that we have an important role to play. First, we need to explain that we are not a multilateral development bank like the European Investment Bank. We are a lender of last resort for the Eurozone. So in a way, you could say a European version of the International Monetary Fund. So we have supported 5 countries over the last 12 years that had difficulties to access the financial markets. And so that's what the ESM is doing. And how do we do that? We have a paid-in capital of 80 billion euro, and with that we can access financial markets and issue bonds up to 500 billion euros for beneficiary member countries. Thanks to that high paid-in capital, the highest of any international financial institution, we have a AAA. And in fact, through our bonds, we help countries by passing to them the AAA labeled bonds, so with a lower interest rate. So that's to explain what the ESM does. Now, you might say, what does that impact, in what sense does that impact climate change? So in the last years, we've become very conscious that we have many ways of doing that. First of all, we are there to support countries that are in dire needs, but we are not only there to overcome financial crisis together with countries, we're also there to prevent such events to happen, to prevent that countries slide on the road towards financial instability. And the preventing role of the ESM is maybe less visible, but nevertheless very important. In other words, climate change can have an impact on financial stability of a country. And that's why assessing the risk of financial stability or financial instability is enormous. And that's why we think that we have an important role to play. We have also a toolkit in this matter, and we are trying to see, to measure how countries are exposed to that risk, because it has an implication on financial stability. I stop there because I think with that I have, in a nutshell, said the essential things.
Thank you, Pierre. And I think it's really also important and pleased to hear that ESM, which could traditionally be perceived as more it's a stability financial mechanism, is also entering into that sphere, trying to support a more resilient economy with all the elements you mentioned. So now that we are all trying here to move to achieve that transition to a more sustainable economy, could you tell me, Ambroise, how can an European financial institution like the EIB help ensure that no one is left behind as we pursue that transition? Because the social dimension as well is key.
I mean, this is absolutely essential if we want to achieve the transition. And let me start by an anecdote. We have approved the climate bank policy at the bank in 2021. Our board has approved that. The board has approved that. The board is composed of the representatives from the Ministries of Finance of the 27 member states. We report to their ministers like Pierre used to be for Luxembourg. It was approved unanimously, this climate strategy, and it was a surprise to many, because many said, well, this is very strange that countries that have a lot more to do to reach the climate targets have agreed to basically move to these ambitious targets for the bank. And for example, the fact that we have given up projects related to gas. And actually, it was approved by unanimity for one reason, which is that those countries, especially the countries in Eastern Europe, were not only convinced but had elements that showed that we would do more for them, to support them more to reach the targets. And that's what we do with a mechanism that is called the Just Transition Mechanism, that works very well to support projects, especially in regions or geographies that have more difficulties to reach the decarbonization. If I can give one example, we have a project in Germany, in Eastern Germany, that is called Lusatia, which is decarbonization of a lignite mine. Of course, lignite is really not consistent with climate objectives. What we have done is we have increased financing to this project to help with new projects of renewable energy, energy efficiency, but even more reskilling, upskilling of workers, so that the workers who were working in the lignite mine could be supported in a new life without the coal mine. Outside Europe, what we do is participation to the same kind of projects with other countries, multilateral development banks in particular, in what we call the JETPs, the Just Energy Transition programs that are in South Africa, in Indonesia, in Vietnam, in Senegal. These kind of countries are going to have very difficult programs of decarbonization. And to support them, we are putting a lot of financing to help them. For example, in South Africa, we are providing support to the company that is doing the ports and the railway to help them with modernization and greenization of the port, so that it can help also in the new life of in South Africa, where people will be less dependent on coal and more dependent on renewable energy.
Thank you, Ambroise. I think it's very good that you share with us those concrete examples how just transition concept existing since more than 10 years can be put into action. So at least it could incentivize also other actors to do so. And I think for having the EIB doing it is really good for us. Pierre, can you tell us now what are the implications of climate change and the green transition for financial stability? What can be done to mitigate such risk?
Yes, I think it is important to put the whole topic of the risks implied by climate change to our societies in context. Ambroise and Fayol has just explained to us the concrete projects that the EIB supports all over the world, and in particular in Europe, to mitigate, reduce the risks of climate change. For us, it is the storytelling is also about the consequences if you do not adjust to climate change. What's going to happen? Point number one, your GDP is going to be lower. So that's maybe obvious for some, but it's contested by others. I think we want to be part of the whole intellectual path that says, let's measure how much we suffer if, in terms of growth, if we do not adjust to climate change. Point number one. So it's obvious that we have floods, that we have lots of climate catastrophes around, the last one being in Spain, which in itself alone costs roughly 15 billion euro to Spain. A huge number, just one event. So that's the obvious one. For agriculture, for industry, that's the direct links that you see. But then there are also, and that's what I would call the obvious one. But then there are other things that you have to take into consideration, is that the damages caused by these events, dramatic events, cannot be covered by insurances, or only partially covered by insurances. So that's already a second layer. So that's the economical observation. What is the consequences for the financial sector? We are here now at COP29 in the week of climate finance. Now, if you have problems to insure this risk, and second, you have sectors in which that will in the end be on grey or black lists. So the assets that these companies represent will end up on what you could call on a list in which you do not invest, and that's the issue of stranded assets. So that can have great implications for banks, for financial institutions, which can not be underestimated. And the third aspect, it's next to the issue of the stranded assets, is what I call social stranding. And the example that Ambroise mentioned, which I did not know he would mention, illustrates that to do climate change adjustment, you also have social issues that come to the forefront. So you see, we try to see this in a kind of triangle, the obvious direct consequences on nature, but then with lots of costs associated, the stranded assets on the second part, and the social aspect on the third. Last but not least, you mentioned it briefly, we have produced a reflection, a document, where we say we would need to have probably a pooling of capital by the public side, in fact, as we have done for the financial crisis with the ESM, in order to help cover these risks in the private sector, and have eventually in this pool that should be nurtured and financed by the sector itself, have a backstop with public money. So that's in fact the setup of the ESM for financial crisis provoked by the sovereign debt crisis. But I think this is another way we try to contribute to this debate.
Can I just
Yes,
come
please.
back to
Sure.
what Pierre said? two things that are extremely important. One, for a financial institution, climate is a risk. And a risk needs to be managed. And I was in New York for the Climate Week in September. It is very interesting the way the Americans are asking the question, are we at a turning point when investments in fossil fuel projects are becoming riskier and probably tomorrow less profitable than investments in renewable energy projects? Because you see the scissor between projects that have the risk, because they are fossil fuel, to be stranded assets. So projects where you lose value you invest in projects like this for 20, 30 years to lose value. And at the same time, renewable energy projects whose price is really declining. I mean, the solar price is down more than 90%. You'll see the same for the wind projects. And they are becoming more and more profitable. This is probably a very interesting time in history when there is a revolution in the green transition. The second thing that Pierre said was about the need for adaptation. I mean, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, climate change is there. It could become worse and worse, and that's why we need to continue to do our efforts to mitigate, to limit the number of gas emissions. But we need also to adapt our economies. Our assumptions is that €1 of investment in adaptation projects saves a lot compared with the €7 that you have to disburse to repair the damages created by an event that you probably could have at least limited if you had done the adaptation projects. And what we see in Europe is every year now, things that were, every 50 years before become every 10 years, now are every year. You have fires in Europe, you have floods in Europe, and I'm not talking elsewhere. But so we need to increase financing of adaptation projects.
I think this is an interesting dialogue that we're having here. I would like to chip in here the following. I mean, it is obvious with the election of a new American president that the attention to climate change risks and even compliance with the Paris Accord are going to be put into question by the new administration. It's not an if, but it is a when. It's been announced. So I got a lot of questions over the last 2 days here, what the impact of that will be on the whole agenda of climate finance. Let me therefore agree with what has just been explained by Ambroise, and that is that climate adaptation in the end will make you more competitive. And those who bet, and there are, that the future will be more fossil fuel are taking a very dangerous bet. Now, on the European side, I think that debate is not taking place in such a way. And we as ESM definitely, together with DIB, encourage European companies and enterprises to continue to invest in climate-friendly technology, because it will give us the necessary edge that we need to be competitive. And point number 2, sad to say, but it's the reality, for Europe, there is no alternative than going green, because we have very little fossil fuel energy on the European continent. So for us, the solution is, number 1, renewable energy, number 2, renewable energy, number 3, renewable energy.
And it is true that it's very important also from a strategic autonomy point of view. That's what you say, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very pleased you mentioned that, because that's also an interesting conversation we are having right now, and I happen to be, I'm truly convinced about having much more investment in climate adaptation that was in the past. Both were everything was about climate mitigation, climate adaptation when I started my career a long time ago, and now we are also over on climate mitigation. And I happened to be on the plane yesterday for this night, with a gentleman from the US. And when I started the discussion as well with him, and say, yeah, but climate adaptation is too costly. So for as Europeans, for us, we see the need, because also Europe will be one of the most affected continents in the upcoming years. So we have taken the lead as part of the regulation concerns, I would say. But for the other part of the world, probably they don't see that as we see that. And I think, thank you, Ambroise, that you insisted on that up here as well, because this is really where it will be a game changer. Also, because we should not speak and think about only Europe, but globally speaking, is we have all common goals to achieve. So I think it's really important. So just getting back to what your institutions are currently doing, Pierre, could you also complement by explaining how VSM integrates ESG consideration into your investment, funding, and lending activities? How does that contribute to fostering the green transition?
Yes, I will answer that question in a minute. Let me maybe also highlight that to counter the pessimism of some here at COP29, I have already seen two events that for me are quite positive. One is that the Multilateral Development Bank, including the EIB, have announced yesterday that they would dedicate up to 120 billion euro per year in 2030 for climate change finance, which is considerably more than what is done today. Second good news is that Article 6, that is about how to organize CO2 transaction through the world and how to encourage compensation through countries will function in the future, is also good news, because it will make the whole market of emissions trading more fluid and crowd in the private sector. So there is a lot of good news out here also, despite some pessimistic ones. Now what we have started, my predecessor Klaus Regling started it back a couple of years ago, and I picked up on that and accelerated it. And that is that, first of all, for our paid-in capital, we benchmark that paid-in capital of 80 billion, and we use a methodology to do that. So that's one important thing we did. Second, we are committed to invest ever more part of our paid-in capital in ESG bonds, most of which being green bonds. Number three, also in our lending activity and also funding activity, we're paying attention to that, and we're also X-raying that so that we can say we are putting ourselves in a position to be accountable for what we do, which is, I must say, not an easy exercise when you are a lender of last resort, because we cannot invest in projects contrary to what obviously the EIB does all the time. But I think we have shown that we can do a lot, and we are very active internationally on this. We are part of the NGFS network since 2022 or 21. We have now subscribed to the principles of responsible investment. All that are obviously limitations to what you can do, but we can live up to that. So I think we are about to be quite convincing in what we do, and we've been issuing since 2 years special reports on all our activities on ESM. So we mean business in the sense that we're serious about this, and obviously we want to be showcased as an institution that wants to be ahead of the curve and contribute in better understanding all the risks entailed with climate change and climate finance.
To add to the optimism of Pierre, two things. One, projects count, and here we are presenting two projects that are really sort of lighthouse projects for EIB. I signed the first one yesterday. It's a project with Côte d'Ivoire, country in Africa that has been suffering from big deforestation. The project we are financing is going to increase the size of the forest in the country by 20%, especially in the northern part, in the southern part of the country. And it goes together with loans that we are providing to banks and funds for them to lend to farmers and to farmers association in order to make sure that they can work in the area of sustainable cocoa, of traceability in the cocoa sector, which is essential for complying with the EU regulation that comes, whose objective is to fight deforestation. That makes me very optimistic. Even more, the enthusiasm that the Ivoirians showed to this yesterday is, to me, a very positive sign. The second project is a project in Europe, off the coast of Belgium. We are actually financing the construction of an artificial island that will be the base for offshore wind farms. And that's something that I find very interesting, because then you can increase and multiply the impact of renewable energy projects that you do to the benefit of everybody in Belgium who benefits from this, and even probably more also in the UK, because they expect to have the links with the UK. So I am really pleased with that. The second thing is, whatever is happening in other countries, I think Europeans can be proud that on climate agenda, they have been for a long time front runners, ahead of the curve, and they remain ahead of the curve. And this is very good at a time when what we see is a sort of revolution in the way energy transition is running, with costs of projects that is down, and with more and more reliance on renewable energy for the electricity that we consume.
Yeah, thank you, Ambroise. And I think also that the EIB is also, of course, operating, as you mentioned, in Europe, but also globally in more emerging markets. And this is where probably there's also a number of projects you are financing that are tackling some social issues. I don't know if you have other examples, maybe.
Well, actually, a good example in terms of social impact of the projects we finance, I would say something on gender. We attach particular importance, especially I'm going to talk about Africa. This is the continent that I know best beyond my own continent. Africa, I don't know if you know that, but the majority of entrepreneurs in Africa are women. And we need to support that. So we have taken a number of initiatives or joint initiatives that have been taken by others to make sure that we would finance in priority when we finance banks who finance SMEs, for example, or who finance smaller structures, banks who have a commitment that the majority of the loans would be given to companies led by women. That is something that is extremely successful. We have many examples throughout Africa. I'm especially covering West Africa. You have many examples in Francophone Africa where it shows that this is money well invested. So I'm very proud of what we do to support gender, because it is also a way to help climate. When you see the number of when you look at every time you do projects that can improve climate, you do improve the situation of women in a country. So I'm very, very pleased with that.
Thank you, definitely. And just worth to mention that microfinance, inclusive finance started also in Luxembourg 30 years ago with some of the well-known associations like ADA, also LuxFlag in Fine, a number of those. But definitely we're also currently working on a social impact framework and also a label. So, Pierre, I don't know if you want to complement, but...
I would like to obviously also pay tribute to what the EIB does for gender, and all the examples that Ambroise has mentioned, I think, open our eyes how useful and precious it is to have the EIB. For me, the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is one of the greatest success stories of European integration and European construction. In fact, what was mentioned also by Ambroise is that Europe has been leading since the beginning on the climate change agenda. That is true, and it's still the case. If we think of it, climate change is by essence something that is multilateral, that covers the whole planet, because we have only one. We don't have a plan B planet, at least not to my knowledge. So at a time where we suffer from deglobalization and fragmentation, political, economic fragmentation, climate change can be and must be something that unifies us. And needless to say that we have tensions that lead to less visibility and clarity to what multilateralism can do. I am convinced that climate change is one of the key issues that brings us back together. In the same way, I would like to underline that it's probably not so much known to the large public that there are similar institutions to the ESM worldwide which are not so well known. Now, the mother of all lenders of last resort is the International Monetary Fund that everybody knows, which encompasses all the countries of the world. But then you have the Arab Monetary Fund, for example. You have the FLAR in South America. You have the Chiang Mai Initiative in the Far East. And all of these institutions, I'm not mentioning, have a BRICS initiatives in this area. What do they show us? They show us that at a regional level, we also try to make sure that we have financial stability. So financial stability and climate change are two themes, two mega issues, I would call them, that bring people together, despite the fact that we might have political or diplomatic divergences, despite the fact that there are 47 wars going on this planet. And we might, as Europeans, only speak about 2 of them. So in the end, let's not forget this multilateral thing that climate change represents as something that brings people together. And it is enough to walk around here to see that. Now, this week is dedicated to climate finance. Next week has more accent on environment. The 2 go together. But what needs to be understood that is, we cannot achieve the results with public money alone. We need to crowd in the private sector. And what do we see here? Not enough, but I see it a lot. On quite a few stands, you see companies. Because without the real economy, we will not achieve our goal. What the EIB does is to crowd in the private sector, but we need much more of that, and we need to encourage our companies to specialize in that area, because that's one way of making Europe more successful and more productive.
Thank you, Pierre. Do you want to add something, Ambroise, before we close our panel? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think this is for you all your valuable insights and reflections, and highlighting the work of your institutions, being leaders in that field, VIB, but as well ESM now embracing that path as well for more financial stability and more resilience. And I think what's also key is really to have that long-term view in incorporating environmental and social risk into all strategy and into all investment that we are forcing, especially bringing up the private sector, on board, because as you mentioned, with public money is not sufficient. We are all here to try to convince as well private actors to join us for that journey.
There is one thing I would like to say in closing. Many thanks to the state of Luxembourg, because we have been welcomed since the beginning, and the Luxembourgers have been wonderful with us. So it's a pleasure to live there.
And may I say that I thank you for that. And the project, I had that in mind and I forgot, just to finish on a humorous note. So Belgium will have an artificial island. I'm going to talk with our friends from Belgium to make it a Belgian-Luxembourg, eventually a Benelux project, because then Luxembourg, which is a landlocked country, might even have an island. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you, and you're perfectly right. Luxembourg is doing a lot. Also in gender, I forgot to mention that before, in having this gender really high on the 10 action plan from the current Minister of Finance as well. All actors are deeply working on that, and together as well with the EIB and the 2X Challenge and 2X Global that has been created by the MDB. So I think we are always taking the lead also on that aspect, and the transition will happen with thanks to women in the field from emerging markets. They are very conscious of making sure everyone has food and has a house.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Merci Ambroise.
Merci Pierre.
C'était
bientôt.
super. Merci à toi.
Merci.
Et t'as vu, on était dans les temps. Hein.